Now that we have a basic idea of HTML5 and the new markup tags, let's get some experience with creating a very simple outline of our page. Now this is the website that we're basically going to redesign. It's called Environmental Brand. I found this on open source templates, and it's going to be similar to this, but maybe not exactly like this. But we have our header at the top with our navigation inside of it. We have a section here for some sort of main image. Then we have a section for our content down here. We have an aside, and we have the article or the content that we're actually using. We have this little small section down here, and then we have our footer at the bottom. Now, one of the things that we have to choose once again is exactly what sections we use and where we use them, and that's always something that's a little debatable. There are no exact let's say there's no exact way to do it yet. There are guidelines that you should follow about creating sections and articles, but even in this tutorial I'm probably not going to be absolutely 100% right in everybody's mind. But that's one of the problems with HTML5 and the new semantic markup. But we'll try our best. Now, what I'm going to be using is a couple different tools. One tool that I'm going to be using is Dreamweaver, because I really like Dreamweaver, and I think it's a great tool to get used to. If you don't have access to it, then there are other tools out there. One tool is Notepad++, and I will be opening up my code in Notepad++ quite often. And you can use Notepad++ to do all of this. There's also textmate on the Macintosh, which is a great piece of software for doing code and HTML. So whatever you like is up to you. There's even this one, aptana, which is a really great open source, powerful web editor integrated development kit, which does all sorts of stuff. If you want to get that, you can use it. After all, this is just text, so it doesn't really matter. Now, whether or not you use Dreamweaver or you use one of my other favorites, the Notepad++, there's a couple things that you should know. One of the things is I like code hinting or code completion to be turned on, but that's just for me. In order to do that in Notepad++, you either have to open up an existing document so it knows what it is, or you need to assign a language with your document. Right now it knows that it's an HTML document because I chose that in the languages. Now over in the TextFX, I've turned on the auto close HTML XML tags, and what that allows it to do is when I start creating tags like header, it will automatically close that tag. And that means that I'm going to be more often correct about opening and closing my tags, and that's something that is just good practice. Now if you're in Dreamweaver, you get the same ability. I'm going to create a new document real quick, and I'm going to choose HTML, none as the layout, but I'm going to use my doc type as HTML5. And we'll talk about this code in just a minute, but same sort of thing. If I am typing in here, I can get a little bit of code hinting, which I like, and you can see it shows header down here, and I could go down and then hit enter and then close that one. Now it doesn't automatically close that tag until I do the left bracket and my /. Now we can actually set that in our properties or our preferences, so that we might want to, let's see, it's under code format, code, there it is, code hints. We can, after typing the open tags closing bracket, we can do that. So for example, this would be header, and if I hit enter, whoops, I hit that right hand bracket, then it'll fix it. Now I can do H1, and you'll see that it wrote that tag inside there. So I really like that myself. We're also going to have to remember to add a little spacing here and there just to make our code a little bit easier to read, but that's something that we will do as we go forward in the tutorial. Either way that you do it is up to you. If you want to use Notepad++, you can certainly follow along with much of the tutorials using that tool. However, I will get into using some CSS with Dreamweaver, because I think Dreamweaver is a great integrated editor. But once again, you don't need Dreamweaver to be able to do the basic code. So let's go on. Now, in order to use Dreamweaver, one of the things that's really, really important, I'm going to close this first, is to manage a site. Now, I've created a folder already, and it's called my HTML5 markup, and it's in my documents, video tutorials, HTML5 markup. I've got an images folder, and I'd like you to download these same images. It doesn't necessarily matter if you download them from here, because if you can get access to this template on environmental brand, here it is, you can download this file. You can also preview it and just download the images you need. I need that image right there so I could download it. I'll need this image, that image, this image, and maybe the background image for these stripes, or we can create it. Pretty much everything else is just going to be CSS. So we don't have to worry about it. There is another image right down here, but we'll take a look at that at a later tutorial. So in Dreamweaver, we want to create, we want to manage our site. So I'm going to go to New. I'm going to call this HTML5 markup. I'm going to click on the folder and make sure that I choose the proper location. So video tutorials, HTML5 markup, and select that as the root. Now I don't have to really do anything else. As long as I've set up a name for it, which is kind of just a name to remember what it is, and then the local site folder, as long as I've done that, then everything should work perfectly in Dreamweaver. Now you'll see that I've got my images folder there. The docs you don't need, that's just me remembering a couple URLs that I want to be able to reference. Now we're going to create our new document. Now we can create our new document in Dreamweaver just by doing File, New. Once again, we choose HTML, no layout, and I'm going to use HTML5 as my markup. And let's take a look at what's been changed here. The first thing at the top is that we have a new doc type. It used to be that our doc type, you don't need to do this. I'm just going to create a quick HTML4 transitional one. And you might remember this is what our doc type used to look like, which meant I could never type that out. I always had to go and use Dreamweaver or something else to write this because it was so hard to remember. So now with HTML5, it's a very simple doc type. Now you'll notice it's in all uppercase, and that really doesn't matter. We can actually just do doc type HTML, and it can all be in lowercase. HTML5 doesn't really have any major rules about whether or not it's uppercase and lowercase like HTML4 or XHTML had. So that's just one thing that is a difference. There's a little bit more fault tolerance and let's say error correction that happens in HTML5. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have great practices in the way that you open and close tags and all that kind of stuff, but you don't have to worry quite as much as XHTML about making everything perfect and lowercase and everything else. Anyway, the next thing we have is HTML, then we have our head, then we have this meta character set UTF-8, sorry, and here's what it said for the old version. So they've simplified that as well. The title is the same, the head is the same, and then the body tag is the same. I'm going to go after the body tag and start the basic structure of my document. So let's take a look back at this page. The first thing that we have is our header and our nav. If we look at this markup, header and nav are two different things, two different elements, and here they're separated, but on the website you can see the nav is inside the header. And that's actually just fine. There's no problem doing that. So let's do this. Header, whoops, if I need to spell that right. And then I'm going to do a couple enters. Then I'll do nav and an enter there. And it's just so I can put that nav inside the header. The next thing that we're going to have is a section for this main image. Now that's kind of a debatable thing about exactly what we do here, because we can do header, oh, I did not mean header, sorry, section, and close that section. But the question is, do we really know what this is? Actually, do we really even know what this header is? Do we really know what this nav is? One of the things that, even though these new tags are here, I still think it's probably better to do a little bit of a hybrid approach with both. Meaning that I would probably do ID equals header, or ID equals masthead. Anything that you want to call it is really going to be okay, because we're using the semantic header, but we're giving it an ID so it will work with kind of the way that we're used to working with HTML4. I'll probably do the same thing with this and call it my top nav, or main navigation. There's a lot of different things, or you can call main nav. Lots of things that you can call that. And this section down here, instead of it just being a section, I could probably call it ID equals main image. So there's where that section will end, and we'll put something in there. The next thing that we have down after that is the content area. Now, it's typical for us to wrap this with something just because it makes it a little bit easier for us to work with. The problem is, do we really need a section there or not? Do we want a section ID equals content? It's somewhat debatable. This is one of those things that maybe there are no exact things that we need. If we call this section ID equals content, then we'll have an aside. That'll be that sidebar. And then after that, I'm going to have something else. Now, we could have our article inside here, or we could have a section, because if we look at it, this could be a section, which is really called the content, but we've already made a content. And each of these could be its own little article. Leader in e-commerce solutions, our amazing team. This is one of those things that, once again, it's kind of debatable. Now, this right here is kind of the welcome section right here, so maybe it's best to really call that one article. If I do that, article, then what will happen is we could actually have a couple different sections within that article, which would be, and let's see those two sections, Leader in E-commerce Solutions and Our Amazing Team. It's really not so bad, but we'll get to giving it some semantic names. Now we have this other thing down here, which is a little section that are extra links of some sort. So what exactly we call that? Oops, that's the wrong tool. What exactly we call that? Oh, is still to be determined. I think that it might be a section. So I'm going to go after the articles, and I'm going to call this a section, and I'm going to call it ID equals 3 links. I don't know if that's the best name. Actually, I'll just call it extras. Really doesn't matter what we call it. But it's a small little section that is actually inside the other section. Now, after that section has finished, this is the content section. Let's see, this content is there, and then I have my aside, then I have an article, and that article finishes there. Then I have another section inside that. I'm going to just go ahead and give these spaces in between. Maybe I don't need to separate that yet. This is where the content section is ending, and after the content section, we're going to have our footer. If we take a look at our page again, let's see, after the content has finished, then we're going to have our footer down here. Now, whether or not this code is exactly right doesn't really matter. It's still one of those things that's very debatable about HTML5. But let's go ahead and save our work at this point. So I'm going to call it index. I'll call it part 2. The reason I'm calling it part 2 is just so I can keep track of where I am in the tutorials as I save my files. And let's stop here and go on to the next tutorial.